Hello again, everybody, and welcome inside the Howitzer and Buzzsaw Show. I am George the Howitzer Gerbo.
And I am Mike the Buzzsaw Asti.
Sports Talk back with you at the center of controversy, as we sometimes always are here on the HBS.
It's perpetually the case in the
Perpetually the
sports
case.
world, really the last decade, but yes.
We kind of like it. I think Mike likes it a little bit more than I do, but we don't invite it. I feel like it finds us sometimes, and it definitely
Well,
found
it's
us.
just going to go on anyway. It's more interesting. I even
Yeah,
told somebody last night, I don't like the mundane. So if it's mundane, it's negative.
I like mundane from time to time, but you can spice
Nah,
it up a little bit.
mundane's negative.
A reminder that you can find the HBS wherever you get your podcast. That includes on Spotify, TuneIn, Apple, Google, and more. Just search Howitzer Buzzsaw wherever you get your podcasts. Also, a reminder that all the music you hear right here on the HBS is courtesy of Hyphen Podcast Group and Kellenby-Conley. Check out their work and his work at hyphenuniverse.com and at hyphenpodcastgroup.com.
You can find us on social at MikeOsti11, at Gerbo3, and of course at Howitzer Buzzsaw for the show handle. And again, I personally enjoy the Apple Podcast Directory, but you can find us everywhere you get your podcasts. And as I say at the top and the back end of the show, every show, if you can't find us, you're just not trying hard enough.
Let's get right into it here, Mike, with the biggest story, I believe, in sports over the last week now. The college football playoff and who has made the selection committee's final four. And even though you and I are generally, I believe, on the same side here of what is right, what is wrong, etc., there are still some nuances in it that I believe can be parsed out as Michigan, Washington, Texas, and Alabama will be your four teams competing for the national championship come the end of the year. Florida State, 13-0 undefeated conference champion, left out at number 5, and Georgia, who was number 1 for the last 2 seasons running, 29 straight win streak snapped by Alabama in the SEC championship game. They fell all the way from 1 to 6, and it kind of strikes me. It's a reminder of, it's funny to watch the people, Mike, because, we're in the last year of the 4 team and everything will be fixed next year, but it will and it won't in some ways. And we're getting into a battle for who,
Yeah. I mean, I guess like the debates, I've kind of told people nothing will ever be perfect because we do argue on who's the 68th ranked team for the NCAA tournament, etc. Yeah. But as we've said before, if you're debating between 13 and 12, they both got 3 or 4 losses. The argument is not as valid because neither one of those teams has done as much work.
Not as intense as when you're dealing
right,
with
and it's very possible undefeated. That the kind of the hope for both of the teams that we cover in Maryland, West Virginia is, especially West Virginia in the new Big 12 is the most historic program. Mm-hmm. They probably in the next few years, if things go right with NIL and the transfer portal, are going to try to be a 12th place team and get in the playoff. But if they have 3 losses and they're 12th and they have 3 losses and they end up as 13 on the outside in, then like this year, if we had a 12-team playoff, obviously they wouldn't have been in this year. But say they had the loss where Garrett Green takes his helmet off to Oklahoma or to Houston, and that's why they're not in, whereas they would have won that game, they would at least be in the 12. Say that's an example one year. You know what I would then say? Keep your helmet on. Like at that point, it gets to where you're not really a champion, even though you're going to vie for one of those top 12, and it does open up to eliminate this debate. And then there is the other part of that is, do you ruin the last 2 weeks of the college football season? Because as much as many are annoyed with these top 4, we talked about on the top of this show that the boring and mundane is negative for me and that controversy creates cash, which is very, very accurate, to coin a phrase from Eric Bischoff, by the way. You're going to have less controversy, at least less legitimate controversy. Again, you're arguing over 3 or 4 lost teams, 12, 13 probably. You're not going to be arguing over Alabama, an undefeated conference champ, the back-to-back defending national champs. All of these teams we're debating that people are saying, what do you tell them? They're clearly championship caliber. They should get a chance at it, all the way from 1 to 6+. They would all be in the 12-team playoff. So this debate and this conversation and this open of this show wouldn't even really be a thing. Like, we would not be debating 12 versus 13. The only team in the country who really would probably benefit off of what's happened the last 10 years is Penn State. But otherwise, it's going to open up. It might be more fair, but do you get less controversy? And this year, more than ever before, you wonder, wink, wink, in the back of the room if they kind of got what they wanted. Like, they knew what they were doing. They probably thought, okay, this result is better money for us. This result, they already show the projections of what TV ratings and money would be with Bama versus Florida State, fair or unfair. They got the higher end of it, and they got the controversy. Might be what they want. But, of course, there's an amazing debate on what they did put out that we're going to get into here.
And just the thing that kind of strikes me and just listening to how people are talking and debating about it, as we have debated the CFP now for a decade, and its entire decade of existence.
Yes, since 2014. Correct.
Going all the way back to our
longest running podcast.
Our infamous, our longest running podcast
during the college football playoff days.
Debating why we hate the college football playoff and our infamous Baylor TCU brouhaha from the first year.
None of them got in. That was kind of the beginning, but that was almost where the committee was saying, okay, these are really like 12 or 13 ranked normal teams we don't care that much about, so we don't worry that they're not there. And they wouldn't have cared if there wasn't an expanded one at that point. There wasn't the national outrage that exists when you kind of have these teams putting this body work together and you involve Bama, you involve a team that beat them, their marquee programs. Even Florida State arguably is a marquee program from the Bowden days. So there's not like a TCU that's kind of under the radar darling that still got in, that everyone knew, okay, they deserve it from the resume, but they're not a team we really want there, but the committee couldn't ignore them. Florida State is a brand name. No one's Bama, but they are a brand name that in every other normal year they would normally be in, and they would be fine. So it's not like Wake Forest did this, for example, from the ACC, where they would just say, it's nice, but we don't want you. So yeah, it creates this scenario here. But the HBS has been talking about the college football playoff longer than anybody else. And I've previously been on record that if you're going to have this mess, even though controversy creates cash and they probably are getting what they wanted, maybe we might as well have just had the BCS all the way through and then do the 12 team, because if you're not going to really do it, if you have a playoff with less teams than you have Power 5 conference champs, right there, you're going to have a problem. You might as well have done the BCS.
And so people are always like shocked at how wildly these rankings, fluctuate. And as we've said before, you just got it. The committee early on in this process years ago, half a decade or plus ago, you put it out you can't pay attention to it. They're nearly irrelevant. And B, I could almost make the case to you that the committee itself, starts week 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 is the championship week.
Money, because the TV networks want them to. They probably shouldn't. They would be in less controversy if they didn't do that.
You almost should just
the season. End of the regular season,
like the
conference
NCAA
championship
tournament
week. Then do that. Maybe like going into the final week of the season to make it exciting for those teams. They know when they have a legit chance, more to play for. Obviously, after the regular season is over, and then obviously maybe again a second time going into the conference title games, and then afterwards. That gives you 4 ranks. Maybe you have to do twice in 1 week, and
because the basketball
that would be controversy, but it would be less. You don't need 8.
Basketball tournament doesn't announce 68 teams to you. In February or in January.
I mean, Joe Lenardi does. So
like,
not
you can have,
but he projects
the officialdom of it, Mike. Like, the AP has a poll, the coaches have a poll, Ken Palm, all these other things for basketball, Joe Lenardi, Jerry Palm, all these people can do their projections, but they're not, it's the officialdom of the college football playoff telegraphing.
Unless you argue Ken Palm's official, because that did get West Virginia in single-handedly last week.
No. Again, no. Ken Pomeroy is his own person. I'm saying,
but
the NCAA basketball selection committee does not publish, hey, these 65 teams are in. It's January.
No, not for the tournament in terms of where the seeding is.
That's what I'm saying.
They do a ranking, and the playoff committee probably would argue that their playoff releasing midway through the season is simply doing a Ken Palm ranking. They could argue that. But obviously know where they project.
Ken Pomeroy is not. Ken Pomeroy is his own person who's very data driven. He's not employed by the NCAA.
But it is it's a factor that even the NCAA brings up
as the AP and coaches polls are in the college football playoff ranking. All I'm saying,
it's on that level of factor. It's not like the calling matrix.
That's beside the point. The point is that the NCAA selection committee doesn't say, hey, these are our teams you're in right now. Keep trying to stay in. Whereas the college football playoff committee says, hey, here's our top 20. They do a whole top 25.
They have a different style tournament, though.
to your point, well, it's a tournament nonetheless.
Because they can't do that because the conference champs get an audit. Maybe they'll be able to do that in the top 12 because they're going to give
you still
bumps.
could predict 65 teams. I think now they release who their targeted number 1 seeds or number 1 seeds could be.
Yeah,
I think
they
that's
do
something
that right
more recently. But no, if you're the CFP, like I could argue you don't release any rankings and you just show up on the day after the conference championships and pick your teams.
I mean, the network wants something.
Or I could argue that that even 5 weeks is too big of a period. Like show up for you're trusting the AP poll and the coaches, which are generally good rankings, and you trust them until week 12 or week 13.
Although they've been very different. If you notice this year, like for example, the coaches poll has offered 10 votes to West Virginia. The AP has offered 0, and that's after at the end of the regular season. That's a bizarre. Like the coaches in AP have started to become more different than they usually are the last couple years.
And to that point,
is that part of the mess we're in too? Because people don't understand which poll they should watch more.
And to your point, that usually happens down ballot. Not necessarily at the top of the ballot.
Not in the playoff rankings. But in general, we did have a lot of debates on the bottom 25.
Correct. But I could argue that the CFP should almost release just 2 rankings. One ahead of conference championship week. Hey, here's where everybody sends conference championship week, which means, do you need to win your game?
It adds something to the incentive of that game. Right?
Yeah, but it's.
What about before the last week of the regular season too?
Yeah, it's to the point that the rankings have been completely irrelevant because anybody can hop in and out. They're just it's extremely fluid.
Here's my question, though. We know that we've been talking about it on this show since 2014 and then in our professional coverage. It's clearly out there. And anyone, no matter what level of intelligence you have with college football or college sports in general or sports in general, the committee has done that going back to I remember on this very show, and at the time it was fair not to understand it because we were debating TCU and Baylor, and you were saying, Mike, I get that one beat the other and the resume is better, but how can they jump the other one when they have a better ranking going the final week of the season? That was your argument. And then the committee said, George, we're doing overall body of work. The overall resume that Mike is saying is more fair because you have to count every week of the season. And then from that point on, it's like, okay, that's what they're doing. It doesn't matter where you are ranked at the end of the season. If you are ranked in this spot at the end of the season, but then you somehow impress more that final week, and it could just be off of a benefit of a schedule. Like, for example, some thought Texas was going to get screwed because they were not facing a team like, say, Alabama was beating Georgia, the perennial number 1 for multiple years.
We're playing Oklahoma again.
Oklahoma State, right? Right. Yeah. It does. Oklahoma State. They had a bad loss to
again, probably no doubt,
Yeah, but like they played a team that was literally an FCS program as recent as 5 years ago. They who lost, meaning Oklahoma State lost to South Alabama. Oklahoma State had lost to UCF, who West Virginia destroyed on the road. Oklahoma State was a program. They were in there because of the 1 versus 2. It was not like the Big Ten where you have Iowa taking advantage of a division where they really are the 4th best team in the conference. People kept bringing up the Big 12, Mike, and it's like, no, that was 1 versus 2. Oklahoma State beat Oklahoma. It sucked for the viewer and ratings, but it was a fair 1 versus 2. But it wasn't like that bumped Texas in because of the Oklahoma State win. What happened, George, the committee basically made this clear. There are 2 things they made clear that I actually like, that I think they made clear with how they got to these 4, and it's separate from the Florida State thing that obviously ended up being a mess. They made 2 things clear. Number 1, they will, and they've been making this clear for years, but they now have made this definitively clear this year and last year. Like it or not, and I do like it, they're going to look at your overall body of work. TCU last year lost in the conference championship game. Paul Feinbaum and everybody else said they are eliminated because they're in the Big 12 and they're not in the SEC. And the committee, which includes SEC people, said, I hear you. They have 5 ranked wins. Mm-hmm. The overall body of work that Mike has been preaching on this podcast for months is good enough. They get in. Maybe they wouldn't have in this field because there were more vying teams, but they got in last year. And then the committee also said this year, Texas, you did not impress as much the final week of the season. We get it. Obviously, beating Georgia is a better win for Alabama. But guess what? The reason why Bama's 4, and they did bump Florida State, but they did not bump Texas, and the debate ended up becoming, the committee chair said this, the debate became between Florida State and Alabama. Why? Texas beat Alabama on the field, and it was over a body of work from earlier in the season. Prior to the playoff, the one thing I will say that the playoff is doing better than the BCS did, George, because if you look back at the BCS controversies, there was one way back in the day. Ask Miami Hurricane fans, the 2001 team's the best ever. They think the 2000 team was better and got screwed, and Florida State fans don't want to hear this, but they got many advantages to get in back in the day. Yes. They bumped them there despite a head-to-head loss, and the committee just said, well, your final week was better, and the computer said you're better. And they're like, what are you talking about? We played you months ago. So the playoff committee is saying, nah, yeah, computer rankings might say you were more impressive in this final week, but Texas beat Alabama. We know it was a different quarterback. We know that Nick Saban's preaching on McAfee that his team's better and different now, but I'm sorry. What happened on the field has to count. You lost, so now you're number 4, where Texas is number 3. I like that. That actually was good. Texas did not have as great of a hard of a schedule. The Big 12 was down, but George, I know that I'll say this factually. If Texas did not play Alabama this year and get that win, Florida State would have been in, and Texas would have been left out.
Yeah.
Florida State would have been 4, Bama would have been 3 probably, and Texas would be left out despite being a Big 12 champ and being Texas that they are. It was just a quirk in the schedule. You do schedules years in advance. It's how Cincinnati got in when they had Notre Dame on the schedule and UCF didn't. They had Notre Dame there. They did the schedule a decade ago when they weren't any good. They played them. They beat them. Notre Dame never thought they would be that good. They did a favor for Chip Kelly, basically. That's how they got him on the schedule a long time ago. And then they won it, and Cincinnati got in. UCF didn't have a game like that because when they put their crappy schedule together in 2017, they did a decade earlier when they weren't trying to vie for anything. It is a schedule quirk. And I also will say, George, I do think to fairly do the college football playoff, whether it be 4, 8, or 12, what I would like to see, and Neil Brown has preached about this, and I do think it's possible, is just more work for the athletic directors. Doing schedules 10 years in advance fundamentally is unfair and creates this scenario. I would put a cap that you cannot schedule a game any more than 5 years before that game is played, and I would prefer 3. I know you can't do it the season of. Yeah. I would. Well, I'm willing to compromise and go 5, but I would strongly prefer 3. 3 would be ideal. But we're even seeing it now. These teams are arguing. Florida State's arguing, and then they release a game they got on the schedule in 12 years from now. They shouldn't be doing that. You don't know what's going to happen at that point. So that, I think, is how you get into this mess if you want to be fair to fair. So,
and it's funny.
I think we can do. We can do that.
It's funny to see that changing. Just this week we heard that after Oregon and Oregon State no longer going to be in the same conference. Oh, what's going to happen?
Yeah, they're going to play
their rivalry. They've agreed they're going to play the Civil War, and it's because that both opponents, both Oregon and Oregon State, were able to move other games they already had scheduled. Right. So you're right.
So you can do it. You don't need to do it 10 years
in an era years ago. It was once you signed those contracts and made that deal, it was like, well, these in stone. I play. Central Connecticut on the 22nd of September in 2017, 17 years down the road or whatever. That's not the case anymore.
Yeah.
So it's been flexible for them.
I even think it should be possible because I know for a fact, and we've talked about this on the show tons, obviously West Virginia's been very vocal that Ren Baker said he didn't think their schedule was fair and previous ADs screwed them. You know why? And I had this told to me to my face from somebody that was with the program then that is still there. Oliver Luck, in particular, was told to his face by the College Football Playoff Committee, because he was very part of those discussions, that the only way to get in the playoff, including Bama, West Virginia, Maryland, all those schools, he was told to his face, the way to get in is not to run through your conference schedule and say it's really tough and have the 5 rank wins in conference, but to impress him and the committee with out-of-conference scheduling and to have at least 1, if not 2, really quality out-of-conference games. Do the Texas thing by beating Bama, or what Ohio State's been doing, and they're the top dogs, but they've been doing it while a lot of the others, Georgia, Michigan, have not been doing that, and obviously it's also benefited for them. So what I would say to what you're saying, George, how you can schedule things tweaked, I would let everything be fluid because we also have a very fluid college football world with conference realignment. There should be an opportunity that Ren Baker, who was not there then, takes over a job.
Move some of these games.
He should be able to call certain schools and say,
Ohio.
Well, no, whoever. I'm saying he should be able, just in principle, he should be able to call, even if he has to call the Big 12 or opposing conferences like the Big 10,
Yeah.
etc. He should be able to call and say, my predecessor was bold-faced lied to. I'm now here. I am not a doormat. And I would like this schedule tinkered with, and I would like the ability to move and shake things around that clearly has just been proven it can happen due to a literal lie that you have not been doing the last 10 years. I'll let bygones be bygones if you let me tinker this schedule. They should not come back at him and say, no, you're in stone for the next decade of scheduling. That is ludicrous. Clearly, you can tinker schedules. We saw it with COVID. We see it now with the Civil War. So, and that even goes back to, in my market, Penn State always comes back with the whole Pitt. They don't want to play Pitt, and Pitt wants to play them, and Narduzzi's very vocal on it and out of conference. With, well, we can't do it because it's very hard to mess with these contracts and out of conference games, etc. No, you can do it. You can do it. So you should be able to tinker these schedules, especially when there's such a debate like this.
I'll give Ollie Luck just a small point of consideration that in the time, in that very small vacuum of time, circa 2010 to 2014, when the first wave of conference realignment hit and he made those deals, West Virginia is coming out of what had been then an 8-team Big East that still was hanging on.
They were leaving though.
Gino and they were leaving. Yes, but they were an 8-team Big East. Right, still had a slot in a BCS game, and West Virginia acquitted themselves and the conference, frankly, that when they showed up in those games in the Fiesta Bowl and the Sugar Bowl, they won them.
Oh, yeah. So I mean, West Virginia did a lot in that.
Everybody sees, hey, West Virginia, you can't just play Rutgers and Syracuse anymore. You're going, and also the other factor around that, Mike, I think bigger is
at the time the conference wasn't
when West Virginia joined. When West Virginia,
but he knew he was going to the Big 12 when he made some of those schedules.
Yeah,
when he made the Pitt game, he knew he was going to the Big 12. That was around the same time.
Yes, but when West Virginia joined the Big 12, everybody viewed it as the worst of the 5 conferences because it was a wounded Big 12 that was down to 8 teams and had to add TCU and West Virginia to get back to 10.
I mean, Texas was very elite at the time, though.
The one true champion era, and so everybody had viewed the Big 12, even though it still had Oklahoma.
I was going to say, because the era that you're saying includes Vince Young in 2006, and then they were in the national title game again with Colt McCoy in 2011. So Texas was in the national title game and BCS bowls all the way through. So it wasn't as deep as even last year when TCU benefited, but it was still had a top dog there.
They get down to 8 teams because Missouri leaves, Colorado leaves, A&M leaves,
Nebraska left,
Nebraska leaves. And so they're down to 8. They add TCU and West Virginia. Everybody's like, and so I can see why Ollie Luck went and did that. But man,
no. And he had to get, it's not an indictment necessarily of him because he had to get them in the Big 12. There was no other options. If they weren't there, they would have been a group of 5 teams.
Now West Virginia stuck with a lot of those games.
Like until 2025 when it opens up again to Ren. But my point is that because we've seriously seen it proven, if I'm Ren, it's not so much of having to have this relitigated or debated. What I would just simply say is, because we agree what was told to Oliver Luck at the time is not what has happened.
Not true
for whatever and I would argue it was a lie because it has never been true. If you want to say it is not a lie, okay. But George, it wasn't a lie until it was
prevailing wisdom, but it wasn't necessarily the truth at the time.
If it was true, it would have at least occurred one time.
Yeah,
it hasn't. We're not talking about this not occurring in the last couple of years. It has never occurred. So again, I would even be on the phone and say, I'd like to call this a lie, but I'm willing to not say it is one in any public releases if you let me tinker with this schedule.
We think you should do this.
There's no reason why it can't be tinkered with. And the entire point of this is you should be able to tinker with schedules. It should not be made 10 years in advance because of all the examples I mentioned, whether it be group of 5 teams with better schedules versus not, Cincinnati and UCF example. People always bring up, and I always bring this up too, group of 5 clearly can't get in if you're not going to let a Power 5 champion. Cincinnati got in because they beat Notre Dame, which was a legit game on their schedule. They just had it scheduled 10 years earlier and got lucky. That shouldn't have to occur anymore. But now what I do want to, get into here, which is the meat of this and which is the raging debate of this. Obviously, Texas got in because they beat Alabama on the field. They won all of their other games, and they went ahead and won a conference championship. Say what you want about the Big 12. So I think we agree for the sake of this, that Texas had to have one of these 4 spots because they had the Alabama win on the resume, and then they won every other game. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if we have Texas there, We also obviously agree, whether it's fair or not, because we had this previous show and I've done personal shows on the Michigan scandal. The committee has made it clear, as long as they're viable, as long as they're not banned from bowls, they can be ranked.
Yeah.
Right. It's not a factor. Maybe they will vacate this if they win this in the future, but that's not how it's done this year. They were undefeated. They won the Big Ten. You could argue, like some teams in the Big Ten that don't have any legit wins, you could argue that. That's the argument against James Franklin and Penn State and Maryland and other schools, but Michigan has won because they beat Ohio State right on the football field. Say what you want about Iowa, they beat Ohio State. So we agree Michigan had to be in, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now I will say all day, by the way, I think if you want to be fair, they should have been ranked 2 and Washington should have been ranked 1.
That's
because
fair.
Washington had more ranked victories and beating Oregon's better than being Iowa. But I think we also can agree, because that was never going to happen with a member from Michigan on in the room. We also can we also agree that Washington, say what you want about the Pac-12 dying, they had 5 ranked wins. They beat Oregon twice. They beat him in the conference title game when they were basically said to be a predicted loser for that game by all the so-called experts. They impressed offense, defense. They're very entertaining and fun to watch. They represent a whole side of the country. They're an historic program with a big fan base. They were undefeated as a conference champ, even though the Pac-12 was dying, but it had good teams this year. We also agree Washington had to be in, right?
Yes.
Okay, so then we have 3 teams, however you want to rank them, and I think it's fine the way they did it, even though I would have had Washington 1, of Washington, Michigan, and Texas. So then the debate becomes Alabama, 1 loss, but clearly the best win versus the back-to-back defending champ in the SEC. They're the SEC champ. It's hard to leave out the SEC champ in Bama. Granted, Bama was left out last year. And then you have Florida State, an undefeated Power 5 conference champ. This isn't like UCF. They were a Power 5 conference champ undefeated, not a group of 5, and they did have an out-of-conference win. We're talking about schedules here, George. It's not like they did the Penn State thing. They had a legit schedule. They played LSU out-of-conference play. They played Florida. Florida's down, so that quality win isn't that great, but they wouldn't have known that when they put the schedule forth. And the LSU win, you also figure really good, but they had a quarterback go down. They're not as impressive. They didn't look good at the end, and they kind of crawled through some of these games, namely with Louisville, who had real bad losses on their resume to Pitt and Kentucky, and the Kentucky loss really looked bad at the end. That's right in your face. Pitt was dealing with one of their worst seasons in the last 30 years. They went 3-9, and Louisville lost to them on national TV. So Louisville had really bad losses, but yet Florida State did win, even though they struggle with them, but struggling with them can make it look bad with the QB out. So the debate became between those 2 programs, and clearly, despite Georgia being in there with only the 1 loss to Bama, they weren't a part of that conversation, really. And actually, George, before I give it to you on what your 4th team would be, I like that too, because separate from doing the overall body of work, which I think is good, separate from respecting head-to-head, which I think they have to do to be fair to scheduling, the committee also did something that I think has to happen, that is the way it should be done. They said, Georgia, all dynasties come to an end, bro. You were back-to-back defending national champs. That does not, you cannot get in a playoff to be crowned the 2023 season champ because of what you did in 2022 and 2021. I don't care if it's 1995. I don't care what you maybe are going to do in 2030. The crowning of the 2023 champ, which is what this will be called, regardless of when the game is played, is about what happened this year. So they did send that message to Georgia that I get it sucks, and that ends your back-to-back streak. There's no way you can claim anything, but you being a champ in the last 2 years does not affect this year. So everyone always says going into these playoff rankings, where they're worrying about the past too much, they didn't do it for the final ranking. So I think that's good as well. But then where would you have gone for that 4th slotted team? The strength of schedule also does favor Bama, even though, again, Florida State's undefeated.
Florida State, Alabama has not, the 2 factors being that even though Alabama may look like right now, as currently constituted with all the players that can play, which we'll get to in a second,
right,
the better team, the point of having games on the schedule and you've won all of them and you beat a highly touted,
and you have wins LSU. Too. That's again the point of it. They have wins that are good.
Yeah, it's not like you said, it's not, even though Cincinnati had the Notre Dame thing, it's not UCF, it's not none of that. winning a major Power 5 conference, doing so while undefeated, and quite frankly, winning the last 2 games when they could have lost both of them
Yeah,
against
right.
an SEC opponent and a Louisville team that's been in the top 20 for most of the latter half of the season with Jeff Brom back there in his first year leading his alma mater, should stand for something. If it doesn't, why do we have any conferences? Why don't teams just play a confederation of games and you pick who? Like, what is the point of?
I have seen that put out there though. That to be it really fair is we should disband conferences because it's already uneven in terms of the conferences.
I get that it's silly with 4 slots and 5 major conferences and whatever.
Right, yeah, right.
And I get that the ACC on the whole, if we ranked them, Mike, they're number 5 this year. Probably
they're even. But you could argue with the Big 12 because the Big 12 was down.
Number 4.
I would say Big 12 is better than ACC this year. Yeah.
So,
and obviously, if the Pac-12 goes away, then the ACC would be 4 out of 4. You could argue the Big 12. Yeah. Now, unless you want to debate the Big 12 because Oklahoma and Texas are going to be gone, but you're going to have Utah come in, which is a very underrated program. You're going to have Arizona State, Colorado, even though Dion had a rough year.
Yeah.
So,
this is if I'm looking at the games and like, again, we go back to body of work. Like, what the hell is the point of the body of work? I'm looking at an Alabama team that
if Florida State, before we go on to Bama, if Florida State did not play, because we spend so much time about the schedule and body of work mattering and who you play and who you beat mattering, even though they're undefeated and it's not a group of 5 thing, it's a Power 5 thing. If Florida State was an undefeated ACC champ, because we agree Florida's down, that win doesn't really mean much. If they did not have LSU on the schedule and played East Carolina or something like that, you would then put Bama in and say your schedule wasn't good enough.
It's a UCF thing, and
even though, but the difference is they're a Power 5. But you would be willing to say that it's similar to UCF, even though they're a Power 5.
Because you scheduled nope. So it's almost to the point that
I'm asking the question. I'm not saying
no, and I agree with you that in both cases, I would agree that Florida State's out, so they're out now. And they're out if they didn't play LSU.
Right, no, yeah, right. I just was trying to get it.
So then go ahead and schedule nobody.
Right.
Yeah, schedule nobody out of conference, play your game, especially now in 12.
They might as well have done it, right?
Yeah, might as well have done it. If it's what was the point of us going through the grind opening week, right? It was Monday night.
You could easily lose. I mean, that's a crapshoot.
Yeah,
for everybody, it's a crapshoot.
And LSU has been highly favored by this committee and the AP voters.
They won a recent national
title. When they had more losses than anybody,
recruits.
They were ahead of 1 loss. They were ahead of teams that had less losses than them in the poll all season long. They've got 3 losses, and they're a top 15 team. Admittedly, extremely talented. They've got arguably 2 of the best wide receivers in the country, and they've got a Heisman contender. Obviously, 2 of them could be Heisman contenders. So respect to LSU, but it goes back to the point that what does it matter your body of work when
LSU did get respected the whole freaking season. Because they were crawling in the top 25 when we were debating the teams that we cover and things like. They never got ranked. Even Maryland had obviously a down year for them, but West Virginia had a better year than expected. Neither got ranked, and LSU, despite losing in worse records, they crawled in there all the time. So they got the SEC bump all the time, and then fortunately for Florida State, even if they didn't have LSU on the schedule, they did have Louisville, who was a top 15 rank, which is what they would answer. I would contend, if we really want to get nitty gritty here, George, Louisville being ranked in the top 15 with losses to Pitt and Kentucky is a bit asimine. Like
a little bit arbitrary.
They probably should not have been. It counts as a ranked win in the top 15, but they had no business. Now I could argue they should be top 25, but to be 14 after when they. I know the Kentucky game was after that rank, but Lord help us. The ones they lost to Pitt, it is hard for me to say they're a top 15 ranked team. Pitt was real bad.
That's fair,
but it counts for them.
And I watched an Alabama team struggle to beat South Florida in Tampa,
and they lost their out of conference big game they put on the schedule. They lost to Texas, even though Texas
lost to Texas by double digits.
Right, it wasn't a close game. They lost the game. Right,
and if it weren't for Auburn tripping over their feet, they don't. So
and who did Auburn lose to? If you want to go to what Louisville did outside of the game, Auburn had a real bad loss. To New Mexico, New Mexico State outside of that.
So you're going to tell me that Florida State, who's undefeated and won all their games that were put in front of them, as we've always said, years like into the 90s. Well, they played the teams in front of them, they won all of them. Florida State,
granted, it's screwed teams in the past, though. Auburn in 2004, West Virginia in 93, which got Florida State in. Winning all your games with an easier schedule has actually screwed teams in the past. That 93 example was very similar to this.
Yeah.
Florida State had a loss. West Virginia was undefeated. And even though Don Nehlen's a Hall of Famer and West Virginia is an historic program, they bumped Florida State because Bowden basically complained in politics.
Yeah.
And what they cited was body of work in terms of strength of schedule was better for Florida State, which actually is true because, as we said, the Big East was kind of down then. Pitt was nothing. I mean, Miami was good, obviously, at the time. But West Virginia had like one quality win that whole year. Florida State had a couple despite losing, and they bumped them in because of strength of schedule. So I get all the younger fans and players saying, oh, we got screwed. We won all our games. If you want to put your history hat on, the Florida State program has benefited multiple times from this exact reverse example, to be fair to this, even though I would have put them as 4 this year, where they didn't win all their games. And Bowden, George, Hall of Famer, 2 national titles, both years. He arguably shouldn't have been in that game. Mm-hmm. You could argue that. I mean, rest in peace. Arguably shouldn't have been in either time. So the program wouldn't be the program if you take those 2 natties away. So that's part of this. But when you get to this year, what message are you sending? Because
you're telling me
hear them because UCF has yelled, well, we won all our games too. And I've seen that comparison brought up when we are, laughingly argued about should Florida State claim things. UCF fans jumped in there and said, well, we did it. Mike, why don't you want us to claim? What George said is the reason why. It is not apples to apples. It is apples to pineapples. UCF did not have the LSU game on that schedule.
Yeah.
Their best game was Memphis, who is not that great.
And so if they say, hey, we can keep a Florida State team that's undefeated and won their conference out because they haven't had their starting quarterback who was a Heisman Trophy.
That's the other part of this, right?
I say you can keep an Alabama team out because they struggled to beat Auburn and needed a miracle from heaven to do so. And they struggled to beat South Florida. If you can make those qualifications for Florida State,
that's part of the eye test.
Say the same thing for Alabama and their schedule.
Yeah, and the committee has said that they do look at overall body work. They do look at head-to-head. They do look at numbers. They do look at how you play. They do look at the eye test, and they do factor in on whether you actually can win a national title or not, or you're just fraudulently in there, and what their eyes tell them on the field. So the eye test is part of this too, and the eye test would tell you that Alabama has not really been that impressive as a top 4 team this year. Again, it's no shade to Bama, George. If I was doing a ranking and we were doing a top 12 playoff, Bama would absolutely deserve to be in there, whether it be resume or how they played. You could argue whether Bama is number 5 or number 16 with Georgia, but they beat Georgia, so they probably are the 5th best team in the country. Like, we're in a situation now where we're having to basically talk smack to what Bama did all year. To be the 5th best team in the country when you previously have won 7 natties out of 10 years is an incredible streak that we never see again. So if they finish just out back-to-back years, people would probably have been saying, oh, what's wrong with Saban? No, nothing's wrong. They're very, very good. They just weren't as good as what Florida State did this year, especially when they had their legit crew of the quarterback. But I think that's the under end of it that I do want to get into here, George. Mm-hmm. What the committee has said, and even some experts said that didn't have a problem with this, is, okay, Mike and George and everybody else, Florida State, they did run through their conference championship. We, the committee, respect conference titles. It was not a UCF thing. We clearly don't respect them because of their schedule. We do respect even the Florida State schedule because they did win an out-of-conference game. They did beat LSU, etc. The reason why we don't want to have them in there is because, unlike Bama, Florida State for us would walk in the door and lose by 20 points, or at least they wouldn't have a chance to win a national championship because they don't have their starting quarterback. So this is also part of entertainment and ratings and all of that siding with Bama. And we don't want to have a team jump in a tournament and have no real shot. And what I say to that, George, is that is fundamentally not how sports works. Like, the example of a player being hurt so you no longer want that team to be a contender is incredibly asinine. And the examples that I'll give you here are the exact reason why that no one said to this committee chair that I would have tried to bring up to him. Literally, when the Philadelphia Eagles won the only Super Bowl of their entire franchise history, despite being long tenured and historic, they did it in this example, where they had an MVP candidate running through the first 11, 12 weeks of the season. Carson Wentz, everyone forgets now, but he was an MVP candidate then. He got hurt. Nick Foles, who nobody believed in, walks in the door, learns the offense right away because he's been there, and he leads them to an historic championship that the franchise had not won before. If you are dealing with the college football committee, George, what they would have done in the middle of that NFL season when Wentz went down, apparently, according to the committee, they would have said, well, Eagles, no, you're eliminated. We don't want to see the backup with Nick Foles in. Older fans, Jeff Hofstadter did the same thing, WVU product back in the day. The Giants won a couple with Bill Parcells. One of them was him as a backup playing in the big game because they had the starter go down with an injury earlier. That is something that occurred, and it can occur. You can have a starter go down in any of these playoff games, in the Super Bowl, in the national championship game. Those things can happen. And here's the kicker, George, because anybody who wants to say, okay, that's pro sports versus college. Here's the kicker, and here's why there was a bias here they don't want to admit. This needs brought up too. Okay, Florida State, they lost their QB, so despite being an undefeated conference champ, you don't want to put him in because the quarterback's hurt. Here's why that's asinine, George. That's the Cardale Jones experience.
Yeah.
That's Ohio State did this. Ohio State ran through a schedule, had the quarterback get hurt. They had a backup go in. Nobody knew who Jones was. No one cared about what he had to say. He won a national title by basically starting 3 games, and then he became a legacy player who's retired jersey, etc. Didn't have a pro career, but he's an Ohio State legend because of basically a month and a half. It was not a full season. He did the exact same thing they're saying they don't want anyone to do. It is the exact same thing. Now, if they did not do that to Ohio State and they would have said your quarterback's out, we're screwing you, okay, I'll hear that. But they just did it within the last 10 years to Ohio State, and they put them in. And what they said at the time, and I researched this, the literal quotes at the time were, they did enough as a team. I didn't think a quarterback getting hurt should screw over the whole team. You didn't think it then, but you clearly have no problem screwing over a whole team now. And then what really is a kicker that I'm not a Florida State fan by any means, and I don't cover them, nor the conference. Mm-hmm. But when you see a player, George, here's the quote that I think had to get to everybody.
Yeah.
He literally said, I should have broke my leg sooner.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the point is, if he would have broke his leg in week 1 and somebody else came in and then they went undefeated that whole season, the committee's basically saying they would have considered them more. That is insane too.
Well, and going back to your Cardale Jones example, which it's hilarious to me that in the final year.
That is the perfect example.
Yeah.
That is better than even the NFL.
In the final year of this 14 playoff, we literally have any workaround they wanted to justify leaving Florida State out. We have an example where they wouldn't have in the past. The Cardale Jones thing, right. And then I thought back to that where Cardale Jones in the Big Ten championship game, Ohio State put up like 50-some points against Wisconsin or 50-some points in one of those games.
Yeah, that's the only difference. That's the counter.
Yeah, well, that's my next question in my head.
That's my counter. Well, they were more impressive than Florida State was
hung
with the backup.
60 on Louisville. Would you have changed your mind then? Like,
that's the counter to what I'm saying. I do think based on what they're saying, they may have still put Bama in. However, George, I honestly do believe they might have considered it more. And I think at least the experts who are not committee members.
I watched that Louisville game.
But they don't want a title won by defense. They want it to be offense. They don't want defense titles. They want, and now there's 2 sides of the ball.
Sorry to the Super Bowl 35 champion Baltimore Ravens then. But
I mean, that doesn't happen anymore. Right. That doesn't happen anymore. Just ask the Jets. Can you win with a great defense and no quarterback? That can't happen. So I get it. No, I mean, the fundamental thing, George, is here's what I would say. Whether we're talking about having a quarterback go down on a football team, whether it be college or pro, and whether you have to crawl through games or you win a game by 30 points, and you have the Cardale Jones example where he walks in the door and becomes a legend of his own right and he wouldn't have started otherwise. Or George, even for another sport, the Chicago White Sox only World Series win of our generation or even within the last 100+ years. 2005. They won a World Series nobody expected. You know what happened very early in that season? The greatest White Sox player of all time, and Frank Thomas, got hurt, missed almost the whole season except for a September run. He did get a ring out of it, but he didn't contribute to that season and winning that title at all. And if you're dealing with the committee, they would have said, well, White Sox, if you can't have Frank Thomas playing in the postseason, we don't want you because he's the marketing draw and he's the Hall of Famer. But yet that team went ahead and won a World Series while Frank Thomas sat in the dugout and got his charity ring. Mm-hmm. So those things happen. That's why you do play the game. You're basically saying the whole adage of, can we galvanize the troops and can we step up around a player who got hurt and try to do it anyway? doesn't matter or doesn't count. I mean, we've seen players like what would be the difference, George, if Florida State lost their quarterback in the middle of the first round of the national championship or the first half of the national title? Or what if Florida State lost their quarterback in the first playoff game? If you're at halftime and he goes down, would the committee have walked in the door and said, no, my God, he can't play the second half. You're yanked. Bama and Saban, can you get on the plane? We need you here in the second half. Like,
when I thought about
Michael, ludicrous.
I thought about Michael Penix. Michael Penix, Heisman Trophy finalist.
Right.
If he gets injured in that game against Oregon and they're not going to have him for the playoff.
Are they out?
They're a fundamentally different team. Or do you then not put them in the playoff even though they've
probably not? But how ludicrous, because unlike Florida State with the big win over LSU, and that's kind of it, they beat Oregon twice. And they had other ranked wins too. And George, this is what I brought up to somebody on Twitter or X the other day as an example and how insane this sounds. And this is going way, way back, so bear with me. One of the greatest Super Bowl beatdowns of all time happened with one of the greatest teams of all time winning, and that's the 85 Bears. They dominated. They were just driven by defense, but they did enough on offense. They were sexy and marketing, and all of that was there. And they won a Super Bowl. It's the only one for the Bears. The championships prior to the Super Bowl I'm not talking about here. It's the only Super Bowl for the Bears. They still brag about it to this day. And they won that game with the New England Patriots. The Patriots did exist prior to Tom Brady and Bill Belichick that nobody feels they really did, or even prior to the 96 run with Parcells losing to Favre. They existed prior to that, and they actually were in a couple Super Bowls. One of them in 85 where they got blasted. They never even belonged on the same field. They beat Dan Marino and the Dolphins in the conference title game, the last one that Marino played in, to get to that Super Bowl. And who's the only team to beat the Bears in the individual season to stop them from being another undefeated champion like the 72 Dolphins? It was Dan Marino and the Dolphins. They beat them, and they beat them handedly, and the Bears have gone on record saying, we could not stop Marino in that offense and Clayton and Duper. We had no answer for them. So, George, if the committee is in charge of the NFL that year, what they would have done is say, Patriots, you did beat the Dolphins on the field and won the round and won the AFC fair and square, but we don't really think you're a contender for the Bears. You're not really that good. So what we're going to do here, even though this is unfair, but it'll be better ratings and we feel a better, more competitive game that they always like to say they want competitive games. We're going to put Marino and the Dolphins, the team you beat, in the Super Bowl anyway, because if we do that, they might be able to catch the Bears napping again and beat the Bears, and then we'd have a really fun game. Marino would get a ring. The Bears would lose. It'd be historic. It'd be great ratings. There'd be movies and films about it forever. So we're going to do that, even though you obviously won the AFC on the football field. Now, George, the person who was debating that Florida State should be left out replied to me saying, well, Mike, that sounds ridiculous. Well, random stranger, yes, it does. That was the point I was making. It sounds insane, but that is exactly what they just did. Like, that is what happened. That they basically told a team, you did it, you earned it, but you're not as good now because the guy got injured, so we're taking you out of the conversation. So that, if that's the reason, that's ludicrous. Now, if they want to argue all day strength of schedule, because the counter is that Bama did play the 5th toughest schedule in the country when you finish out analytics, and Florida State, I believe, was at 55. That is a big separation. If you want to do strength of schedule, okay. But if you're going to go injured player, injured quarterback, especially when Florida State does have the LSU win and did go undefeated as a conference champ, no. That's asinine. And no other league would they do that. I mean, that example of you're not going to take out a team that earned it for a team that maybe would be a better in the game is what the committee did this year, as insane as it sounds. I mean, do you have any comments, though, on the rebuttal of all of that? Now, we can talk all day about the quarterback being injured and how ludicrous it is.
The final point I do want to get to, and this is like perfect,
okay. Yeah.
perfect buzzsaw territory for you, is if the college football playoff champion is either Texas or Alabama, and the Orange Bowl champion is Florida State.
I will say God's writing the story for Michigan to win, by the way. Could ruin all of this for you because they just had the controversy. I feel like they're going to do it, but go ahead.
Michigan, Texas, or Alabama, with the asterisk that I personally believe that within 3 years, Michigan will have the championship and the wins all vacated.
They're going to win this year and vacate it, 100%. Yeah. That's what I think is going to happen this year. But if Michigan wins it, I don't know how. Yeah, I don't think any of this is going to.
So let's say, for conjecture's sake, that Alabama beats Michigan, Texas beats Washington. So you have 2 one-loss teams in the CFP National Championship.
Right.
Florida State is an unbeaten team that beats Georgia, 2-time defending national champion.
Yeah, and that's not an easy thing. They could lose.
No,
I mean, they could lose. They could lose.
They could lose, and they could lose decidedly, but it's hypothetical.
Right. Georgia's very, very good. And,
yes, Georgia's very good. We're not
saying. Fortunately for this, by the way, they would have no way to claim if Alabama wins because they lost.
Yeah, unfortunately for them.
So they would lose their claim. Yes, they would not be able to
I got no problem with Florida State, and not only Florida State, but then the AP, which has been crowning national. We don't have a good way to pick a national champion in college football.
Never.
It's been a beauty pageant for nearly 100 years now.
100 years, yeah.
Yeah. I can see the writers then saying, yeah, Florida State's national champion. They did everything they had to do, and they beat one of the best teams.
You're saying in the AP
one of the best teams in college football ever, historically.
Yeah. And your example, though, is requiring a number 1 ranking. To clarify here, you are requiring a number 1 ranking in the AP or the coaches or something of that effect.
They need a number 1 ranking. Yeah.
Well, no, but
somewhere.
You see who you're talking to here. The reason why I'm clarifying this to make this out for everyone to realize, obviously we're alluding to the fact that UCF, despite a very, very easy schedule in comparison to everybody else, has claimed a national title in 2017, and they put it on the press box. However, and you can look this up, by the way, the NCAA, which has a list of all of the titles that are shared, even 6, 7 deep, with all of the claims from every publication they would recognize, does not recognize that one. I was standing there, whereas the Lester Jordan winner, which gives away who he is.
Mike got to go there this year and see it firsthand.
Well, no, I knew it was there, but
I know.
But he stood in the face of his counterpart at UCF and said, "It's not going in my book until you call the NCAA and the NCAA claims it." And the NCAA is not going to do it. So it is a very, I could argue, the most controversial championship ever claimed in sports. But it is there on their press box. And I've also had somebody at UCF, by the way, tell me they wish the program didn't do it because it is tons of work for them having to argue with opposing SIDs for programs every single week. So anyway, that's the life they're living as long as it's on the press box. But the reason why I asked for clarification, George, is not so much Group of 5 versus Power 5, which that's part of it.
Yeah.
But UCF's argument is because they did not get a number 1 ranking in the AP. They did not get a number 1 ranking in the college football playoff. They did not get a number 1 ranking in the coaches poll, by the way. The number 1 ranking they got is from the Colley Matrix, which I brought this up earlier in the show for a reason. They got the number 1 ranking in the Colley Matrix. And for a history lesson here, and this is on Wikipedia or anywhere you want to do your research, the Colley Matrix is considered the most controversial publication of the last 100 years. 4 times they have awarded a national champion, meaning the number 1 ranking, to a team that did not even play in the de facto game or be close to a 1 or 2 ranking in any of the other major polls. Now, here's what's crazy, George. The other 3 times before 2017, when the Colley Matrix did that, the other program they gave the number 1 spot to, who didn't get it in any of the other rankings, whether it be BCS, playoff, or even before when it was just about rankings and there was tons of claims, those 3 programs refused to claim it because they agreed it wasn't legit. And by the way, one of them's Oklahoma. Oklahoma has 7. There are some that believe they've won 12. They don't claim the other ones because they think they aren't legit, because they're not in the polls we're talking about of the AP, the coaches, etc. That's part of the 1922 debate for West Virginia, by the way. The fans bring up they had more wins. Undefeated. They won a bowl. They're undefeated. There's 5 claims, but one of the claims is to a team that had 7 wins and a tie. Why wouldn't West Virginia get a claim? They got a number 1 ranking in one of these BS polls way back in the day, and I've also been told that if it was a more legit poll, they would claim it like they did basketball, because that was an AP, but they're not going to do it for a Colley Matrix bullshit, which is exactly why they don't give it to UCF. So that is the difference here. So as much as I hate UCF's schedule, if they would have got an AP number 1 ranking To make this clear, as much as I hate UCF schedule, I'm not the one. Yeah, I mean, I have one vote. I don't have thousands of votes. Like, I can't control this. So I do think UCF schedule in 2017 was not legit enough. I do. I'll debate it. I'll put a flag on it forever.
Most people would agree. Most people would agree with you on that.
Well, okay, but George, we've seen this. Yeah. We've seen this in recent memory. Like USC, for example, they have claimed 2 from the early Pete Carroll days. Only one of them was in the game. The other one was an AP ranking. If UCF would have got an AP ranking in 2017, I would have to concede that they legitimately can claim 2017.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is the number 1 ranking was from the freaking Collie Matrix that nobody else thinks is legit besides UCF. And by the way, the athletic director at UCF who claimed that is no longer there. He is no longer there, by the way.
You speaking it to me right now is the first time I've heard of it. So
heard of what?
The Matrix that you're talking about.
Well, you know how much I've been in this debate with people that I've researched it. I
know you had to go deep. You had to go deep.
Well, I got to be honest with you, and I'm going to say this seriously, and I think you can attest. I feel like I know the UCF debate and that season more than people at UCF, including the former AD who claimed it and the governor who agreed because of politics, and anyone who's a fan of UCF.
Outlandish people.
Like, if this ever goes to Congress, because you used to work there, I need you to say, I really seriously need Mike Gosselaar to be
as a witness. Yeah,
I know. I want to be like on the legal team against UCF. I need you to get me there.
This is Mike Gosselaar. He's a college football reporter, but just listen to him.
You know what it'll be? It'll be literally my cousin Vinny, where they bring in Marissa Talmay, and they're like, well, she doesn't have anything to say about this because she's just a woman and she couldn't possibly know cars, and her brothers, that's not legit. Yeah. And they're going to say, well, who's this media member? He's not an actual lawyer. How can he be on our committee? How can he testify here? And then they're going to hear me and be like, no, we're going to allow it in. That actually makes some sense. He actually knows what he's talking about. Yeah. So that is why. So then you are saying that if Florida State gets, because George, you know why I'm saying this right now?
Mm-hmm.
Do not put it past the Collie Matrix to do that. This is what they do. They do this on purpose to see if the program will claim it or not. It's almost out there. They're doing this on purpose.
Yeah.
So I would not put it past them doing it. But to make this clear, you're asking if Florida State wins and they get a number 1 ranking in a legitimate poll. So you're obviously, if the Collie Matrix gives it to them, you would not agree that should be a claim.
Considering I've never heard of it, I'm not gonna. Yeah.
Okay. So to make this clear, you're saying if somehow the playoff, the coach, which wouldn't happen, the coaches poll, the AP poll, those are the 3 that have been around for 100 plus years.
Yeah,
like any of those 3 polls.
I need the coaches or the writers to give it to them, and I think the writers in their judgment, because they're not beholden to the CFP, right. I think the writers would give it to Florida State in my scenario that I've.
Yeah, and because they're a Power 5, they did have a strong out-of-conference win over LSU, who's obviously in the SEC. They did win a conference championship in a Power 5 that is still going to be part of the Power 4, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. And they also would gain a number 1 ranking in a legitimate poll, whether it be the AP. I would also, I think for the sake of this, we'd have to say the coaches could be part of this. If you want to claim a coaches poll national title, that's fine. By the way, I believe that USC got a coaches and AP vote. They just didn't get, I think it was 2004. They didn't get they weren't in the actual national championship game in the BCS. So they have the one legit and then they have the other. But if it's the coaches or the AP, to make this clear, George, then yes, I would give it to Florida State. But I'm not going to be a hypocrite, even though they're a Power 5 with a better schedule. If it's the Collie Matrix, I don't want to see it on the press box. Like, it got to be the AP or the coaches. But yes, I think we are full head of steam for it being the AP or the coaches. They would probably need, even for the writers, Alabama's going to have to win this.
Yeah,
they would probably need Alabama. Like, if Michigan wins it, I do not think they can claim, because Michigan's undefeated.
That's why I give I give you the 1-loss teams. So if a 1-loss team wins the CFP, obviously.
So even if Washington would somehow win it, you can't have a claim then either.
No, Washington's the undefeated, winning the playoff. They won their conference. They beat Oregon twice. Like, that's undisputed to me. I think.
Okay, I agree with that.
You can dispute it if your jerry-rigged tournament has a 1-loss conference champion or a 1-loss team as its champion, and then Florida State, who has beaten Georgia, who's the best team of this era, wins their game and they're undefeated. I think you can stake a claim to it if you're the Seminoles.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. But I guess last point on this, which is what I did want to ask, the only argument separate from the quarterback being hurt and separate even from They did beat LSU, but LSU did get exposed, and Florida wasn't that great. So then they struggle with Louisville, and that also can be brought up. So if we get into like a legitimate debate that some are having, separate from worrying about a quarterback being hurt or ratings or money or an unfair tournament, if somebody said to you, George, I know that you guys are saying wins on the field, and Alabama was impressive in some of those games, but like you and Mike are saying, they did win them, and that's the same as Florida State crawling to victories. So what would be the argument for you? Alabama has the 5th toughest schedule, Florida State at 55. That is not like 5-7.
Sure.
That is a big disparity. What would you say to Alabama fans who would say, for a legitimate debate here, our schedule was tougher? So why are you saying we have to do more in a tougher conference? If Florida State played Texas, they might have lost as well. We had a tougher schedule.
You got to win. You still there has to be some.
Well, strength of schedule is part of the committee's decision making. That's why I'm asking it. It is not a Mike Osty thing. The committee does say the strength of schedule matters.
Winning all of your games, as is. Basically you've devalued. Again, setting South Central Florida aside from 2017, you've devalued.
I wish we could set them aside.
Being undefeated, you've devalued having to go undefeated now. I think
they did.
Is my problem with it. What is the point of me reaching out and scheduling these games? We are, if I go full buzzspiracy here, we are on the very leading edge of Power 5 teams like Michigan has done for years, not caring to schedule anybody worth a damn outside of their conference.
Yeah, to be fair, they did lose UCLA because of COVID, though. They had him on there for I think this year or next year, but they lost it because of COVID.
Fair. And point 2 being the early stage of the demolition of the ACC. If you didn't think conference realignment was goofy enough, we already heard the rumblings before that Florida State was looking to.
Yeah, if Florida State or Clemson would leave, that would kill the conference.
Outside investors, and by outside, I mean way outside in terms of Qatari and potential Middle Eastern interest. To help
live golf over there. Yeah,
exactly. Literally. To help provide them the funding to get out of the GOR, which is the grant of rights, which the conference has that allows them to get their media deal.
And then there's even those, and I don't have enough to say this is legitimate, but there are some that are trying to report that there are ACC schools not named Florida State, so say named Pitt and Virginia Tech, that are calling Brett Yormark about if they would be interested in the Big 12 if this would happen. That has been out there, and I do not think that sounds a little bit insane. I'm not legitimizing those reports right now, but we've seen that happen before where, our top dog is already flirting with disaster. It's not like they want to leave, but there are some that are saying that those kind of middle tier schools are just calling other conferences, namely the Big 12, saying if this occurs, if this occurs, they should actually, if they're not doing it, they should do it. And I do actually wonder why they're calling the Big 12 and not the Big 10, because that is the report they're calling the Big 12. But it could be that the Big 10's closed off and they're not taking anybody else. But that is the report they're calling the Big 12. Who, by the way, then would need to freaking change the name. The Big 12 with 25 teams would be ludicrous.
Penn State would almost certainly block Pitt from joining the Big 10, I personally believe.
Probably, because Franken doesn't want to play them out of conference,
Virginia Tech, again, the caveat that the Big 10 loves, of course, their AAU. It's the Association
Pitt would kind of fit in there,
Universities. Nebraska was in it when they joined the conference. I believe Nebraska is no longer in it. Pitt would obviously fit in. Pitt's an excellent academic school. Virginia Tech's a good academic school. Virginia Tech would be interesting because they like it's again, Big 10 is major state universities, very small.
You would get more. I mean, they deep into the DMV just with Maryland, which is why they brought them from the ACC. So, but you would arguably get that again. You would get the same program, getting in the same market.
Exactly.
And you could argue whether there's more Virginia Tech fans than Maryland fans in the area.
Oh yeah, I've got 4 teams in 4 states. I've got Penn State, I've got Rutgers in New Jersey, I've got UMD at Maryland, and I've got Virginia Tech, and I've got now the whole Mid Atlantic as part of my conference.
But I'm just saying the reports are they're calling the Big 12, not the Big 10.
Oh yeah. No,
I'm not saying they're legitimate reports, but the rumors out there.
I would say they're a better fit at this point in the Big 12, just in terms of the size of the universities in the Big 10 and the standards that the Big 10 has. Virginia's weird because Virginia's got a lot of small college. Pitt would, I 100%. Pitt's almost too small. Like Northwestern's only in the Big 10 because they were a founding member.
I mean, could you count Pitt's satellite campuses? They got a bunch.
No, just less in terms of enrollment, even, and just in terms
because they got
like
Pitt Johnstown, Pitt Greensburg.
Yeah, no, I get that, and it's not like a disrespect to Pitt. It's just like Penn State's definitely going to block you like 100%. Virginia Tech might have.
I think they would want to try and get blocked so they can brag. They can argue about that forever, though. Like
sure.
that would send they would earn they would Heather Lyke and Narduzzi would want to get blocked.
Yeah, they don't even want to. Penn State doesn't even want to play him in sports.
That's
let alone
what I mean.
let him in the conference.
They would block him.
Yeah.
No, but I'm just saying that is part of it too. So
yeah,
Florida, and I'm sure Florida State. One of two things could happen though. The ACC has defended Florida State, so maybe this would galvanize them together, or they would want to get out. But the funny thing, a part of this too, which is the other end that committee has not answered, they keep saying that they're going to respect conference titles, but they obviously didn't respect Florida State's conference title. Mm-hmm. But then how are you going to do that? Even though there'll be 12 teams, how are you going to do that diligently when you're going to have marquee programs who are going to finish like 4th or 5th in the SEC or Big Ten because they're now grouped together in these major conferences? Texas is going to be 3rd or 4th in the SEC most of those years after they were winning the Big 12. Like if Texas had the Bama win but didn't have a conference championship, they might not be there. And yet that could be easily what their result is next year in the SEC because it'll be a much tougher road all the way through. So it'll be interesting how as much as we know for sure how the committee has seeded these teams and ranked teams for the playoff since 2014 in this 4-team playoff, we don't necessarily know what they're going to do with the 12. That could be a whole nother ball of wax. That could be a whole nother thing where you have to do a different schedule. That could be a whole nother thing. But I do think AD should be able to tinker with things because we're expanding the playoff. It's all different. People were lied to. Like, just let it be and let the tinkering happen. We've seen that now with the Civil War. They literally are changing games next year, a week ago. Like, they clearly can do it. But there's some hypocrisy here. The only legitimate argument I do feel that exists is the strength of schedule one, which I've always been a proponent of because, as I've said, George, even though you do want to respect, you got to win your games, and winning your games should matter. I mean, this is true too, and this is the reason why Liberty wasn't even in this conversation at all.
Yeah,
they weren't. It's George. It is easier. It is very impressive to win all of your games, whether it be against a high school team all the way through or against Alabama all the way through. It is very hard to win all of your games all season. 100%. It is impressive to win all your games. UCF in 2017, very, very impressive. However, it is easier to win all your games when you play weaker competition. It just is. That is why you go from being very impressive to where the national championship claim is a farce, to where that could be part of the debate this year if it wasn't for the QB being hurt. So I would have put Florida State in there because they did have the LSU win. To make this clear, if they did not have the LSU win, I would actually probably not have put them in.
Yeah, as we said,
Whether the quarterback's hurt or not, that would have been like a really thing that would really suck, and I would even have put out a release like, God, you're the best 5th-ranked team ever, but we can't do it. Yeah. Alabama's schedule was top 5 in the country, even though they crawled through games. But they did have the LSU win in reality. They were in the SEC. It's not like you beat a team in the Big Ten because the SEC, Paul Feinbaum can say, well, we're still better. You beat an SEC team. It's an SEC team. And he beat multiple of them, actually, if you want to count Florida too. So that they did everything I was asked for. Like, I think the simplest thing is here, if you didn't put Bama in, you could have said to Bama, look, you're normally great, but you lost to Georgia. You crawled through the Auburn game. It's really hard. That's what you should have done if you wanted to be in. If you didn't put Texas in, you could have said, I know you beat Bama, but you lost to Oklahoma. Like, that's not really a top 5 team. That's a top 20 team barely. That's what you could have done better if you wanted to be in, even if you didn't get in. With FSU, there's nothing to say. There's nothing else they could have done. And yet they still didn't get in. So we'll see what happens in the 12-team playoff. It would have been very interesting if we got a 12-team playoff. It's very possible, George, it's very possible we got a 12-team playoff that Florida State would have lost in the first round because they didn't have a quarterback and they had a backup.
Sure.
That's possible. But I would have felt better. Yeah, get them a chance. If I would have felt better, they go ahead and lose. And, I do want to say, too, the example that most of the national media bring up, well, they didn't want to have the TCU thing happen again because TCU got absolutely mollywopped in the national championship game, which was one of the more decisive wins in a national title game ever. Here's my comeback to that. They beat Michigan. If they walked in the playoff and they lost to Michigan by 60 points, I could hear you, because that maybe would argue that they weren't really legit and they did benefit after losing a conference title game. I hear you.
And even the year
They
Cincinnati
beat
was in
Michigan.
there, it was a very low scoring. The year Cincinnati got in, it was against Alabama, if I recall correctly, with a low scoring, grinded out like what 20 to like 3 or 20 to 7 type of game.
So, I mean, Alabama struggled with them for a while, but that's the thing. TCU beat Michigan. You can say what you want about sign stealing.
Yeah.
If Michigan was stealing some signs, TCU beat them anyway.
They didn't take them for TCU. Yeah.
TCU, and they claimed they knew about it ahead of time. Like, TCU beat them. So if they weren't as good, you know what can be said that's a definitive, George? TCU, not nearly close to Georgia. True. 100%.
Sure.
Close to Michigan. They beat them.
But they deserve
maybe even better.
Yeah.
I mean, they beat them.
Yeah.
So that doesn't work with that TCU example, because I don't care what the ratings were. You got to give them a chance. They deserved it. And they beat Michigan. If they would have lost by 40 to Michigan, okay. It was not an Iowa thing in the Big Ten title game that Iowa should never have been there and they benefit off divisions. It wasn't that. They beat them. They won.
Yeah.
So that ruins that too. But yeah, Florida State got screwed. And, if they want to try to claim something, they got to probably root for Bama now. And I think it'll be funny. I don't think it'd be the UCF thing. It's not apples to apples on that. But, the other end of this, Georgia, is once we get to the 12-team playoff, will there be less controversy, and will that create less cash? Will that create less intrigue of these final weeks of the season? Because then Florida State and these teams would go in, Texas, Bama, they would go into that game, Washington, Georgia. I mean, Georgia, if we had a 12-team playoff this year, Oregon would still be in, Florida State would still be in, Georgia would still be in. A lot of these, Alabama obviously would be in, Michigan would be in, Ohio State, despite losing to not even being in the Big Ten title game and losing to Michigan, they would be in. Like, you would the last 2-3 weeks of the season probably would not be as exciting. You would know the loser would still probably get in. So that is what you also are giving up by doing the 12-team playoff, even though it would be more fair.
It'll be a fun final month of the season here as we figure out who exactly will be the national champion one way or another, by poll or by bracket.
Yeah, there's never been a legit national champion. You could argue they're all not legitimate if you really want to get down into that.
Let's take a quick check of the baseball hot stove, Mike, which got very hot here in the last 48 to 72 hours here. San Diego had, over the past 2 seasons, built their payroll and loaded up a lot of players. Manny Machado and Juan Soto, and likewise to try to make a run at it, and widely predicted to be not only the NL West champion last year before the season, but also potentially a pennant champion in the National League. The Padres fell flat on their face and didn't make the playoffs. So now here in the offseason, it may not be a complete teardown in San Diego, but there's going to be some rejiggering of things as they trade Juan Soto, who is one of the most electric players in baseball, 2019 World Series champion with the team that drafted him, the Washington Nationals. He will, of course, go to the Evil Empire, and no surprise, the surprise may be just the ridiculous haul. It's a 7-player deal with a lot of people that you haven't heard of. Soto and Trent Grisham, outfielder from the Padres, head to New York. Pitchers, Michael King, Johnny Brito, Randy Vasquez, pitching prospect Drew Thorpe, catcher Kyle Higashioka, all go to the Padres in exchange. And then add to that, the Yankees got Alex Verdugo from the Red Sox, which is a little bit rare because they really don't obviously deal too much with Boston, their arch nemesis there. But you add Soto into a roster, Mike, that already includes Aaron Judge, who hit 60 home runs just 2 seasons ago, and a guy coming off Garrett Cole, coming off who's had an excellent career, his first Cy Young award as a member of the New York Yankees on his 3rd team. Gets his first Cy Young, which almost like a career award, because he's been a Cy Young level caliber pitcher, in my opinion, for most of his career, including with Pittsburgh. And now you look at the Yankees, and here we are back again, where you got people that wanted to bleep Aaron Boone and fire him, in April and May of last year.
It's amazing he didn't get fired years ago, based on how the Yankees
he didn't get fired years ago.
If Steinbrenner was still alive, let's call a spade a spade. George. If Steinbrenner was still alive, he wouldn't have been fired.
Mid-game at one of those points, definitely.
100%. Yeah, he fired Billy Martin in the middle of game.
Yeah.
Right, 100%.
And so here we are. Boone survives, and now Mike, he's going to preside and lord over one of the, at least on paper again, one of the most talented teams in baseball. That's going to have a World Series expectation on its head for a franchise that historically has won one in every decade except the last one. 2009 was the last.
The 80s, the other one they didn't win.
World Series in the 80s, yeah, with the World Series title for the Yankees. So here we go again with this, Mike. Is it actually for real this time with the Yankees?
As a team, as a contender? Yeah. If they can be healthy.
Baltimore 100-win team last year, Tampa Bay.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair to the Yankees, their fans may scream, Stanton and they have not really been fully healthy. Even Aaron Judge this past season, the last 2 years, they've had Stanton and Judge, who you figure would be the Bronx Bombers, the 1-2 punch that nobody could handle. If one doesn't hit a home run, the other one will. They haven't had both of them on the field enough. Stanton a couple years ago, Judge this past season. So if healthy, I do think if healthy, they can be a contender for a playoff spot. They're going to be right in there most of the season. I get Baltimore had their great year last year, but that arguably could be an aberration. And they also did not perform in the postseason. But as far as saying they're a World Series favorite, which is what Yankee fans want to hear, and that is where the bar is, for just getting in is not enough. And obviously there's more spots now than back in Steinbrenner's heyday. So getting in the postseason can be a viable thing, even as a wild card. So even if Baltimore is good again, it could even be a wild card.
Yeah, and to your
that doesn't mean they're a World Series favorite. So I'm not ready to say they're a World Series favorite. I am ready to say they're a playoff contender. They're better than last year. They should certainly be in the postseason if they're healthy. They should be right there in the American League. They could maybe win a series
in the American
or two.
League East, their division,
winning a World Series. I don't know.
The American League East sent 3 teams to the playoffs last year in Baltimore, Tampa, and Toronto, and left out, and New York and Boston were left out. It is the toughest, in my opinion, the toughest division in baseball.
100%. And you know what you could say about the future? The Yankees are making moves. They're adding more to the offense, of course. They're adding more home run power if they do lose one of them to injury like they've been the last couple of years. And yet, you've had teams like Tampa get in there and contend almost exclusively off pitching. Which continues to be maybe the spot the Yankees are not focusing on as much the last several years when they're always in rumors and even now for offense. So how far can pitching take you? We'll see with Tampa. They've yet to win a World Series. They've got in them. But this recent run of the last 5 years, they got in one to lose to the Dodgers, and it's mostly pitching that is getting them there or getting in the postseason or making them a contender, but they can't get over the hump because there's not enough offense. The Yankees, basically, there's enough evidence, George, to argue that last year, 2023, was an aberration offensively. They usually are a very good offense. So I would figure the offense will be good. Will they have enough pitching to be a true contender? They should be a playoff team if healthy. Will they be more than that? Is a whole other question. And then it's also hard for us to talk about this in December right now because we've seen in the past, George, you're talking about how Boston was not a relevant team last year. We've literally seen Boston go from last place to win a World Series the next year in recent memory. They could easily make some moves with all their money and all of a sudden be a contending team that now we're saying is right there with the Yankees or beyond, and Baltimore and Tampa too. So this is still early in the hot stove. The hot stove is not over. It is still boiling up. But this is a big move for the Yankees. And I would say that while Boone is getting another shot at this that he wouldn't in a previous generation, and Cashman is still there lingering, even though he won all those World Series and led all those teams with all the money in the 90s and early 2000s, the fan base has turned on Cashman if you talk to a Yankee fan. They are not celebrating 1999, 1996, 98, 2000 anymore. They're sick of it that they haven't won a World Series in 2009, so they skipped a whole decade. They haven't even been in there since then. So, George, if you're the Yankees, you talked about what they've done over decades. From 2010 to 2020, they didn't even win a pennant. So they did not win a World Series in the 80s, but they at least got in one, losing the Dodgers in 81. You could argue this recent decade is the worst decade of success for the Yankees in the last 100 years. And they've had money. They beat everybody else in payroll. They've had stars. They've had Judge go for home run records and an MVP. Like, they've had good players. It's not like it's been this abyss of talent. So that makes me wonder how much longer they're going to deal with Cashman. This feels like a year, George, I'll say, that if the Yankees are not a true contender, and I don't mean just for the playoffs, but to win a pennant and maybe even be a World Series champion, being a favorite to win the World Series most of the year, maybe even get it done, at least win a pennant, or certainly get in the ALCS. I would not be surprised if Brian Cashman, they might not want to ever fire him with his legacy, chooses to walk away. They end the relationship with Brian Cashman. We've seen that before. And even Boone is then let go. Like, this probably will be a different regime for the Yankees if this does not work out, and if they somehow miss the playoffs again, or lose right away, or lose in a wild card round, or even don't get the LCS. They got to at least get somewhere when they're making moves like this. And now they're doing what Boone has called for: act like the Yankees of old, make the moves. Well, here it is. They got to now win more. The pressure's on.
Let's switch burners on the stove to the biggest whale of them all out there, and that's Shohei Ohtani, whose time with the Angels is coming to an end. It probably should have in the middle.
You
of
would
last
figure,
season.
But yes,
Angels did not decide to trade him, and then they just continue to suck. So now here we are. As
I mean, he got hurt too, but yeah,
sure. They could have traded him,
Yeah, but I mean, like, what are you getting? Like, the team that got him, what were they going to do with him? But yeah, you get him for the future.
Angels ain't gonna get nothing now.
Yeah, no, right. And I mean, the team, but at the other end of it, like, yeah, the team that got him would have worried about the future.
I don't know. You could probably could have got like a relief pitcher for him now. Angels get nothing. You get nothing.
Yeah. Okay.
And so here we go, and it's an interesting way that it's going about it. We don't know when he's going to sign. We don't know where he's going to sign. He
literally secret free agency. If you talk,
he and his camp, yes, secretive free agency.
Hush free agency, I believe was the term.
Yeah, very much in his kind of nature, where he's
hard to do in this era. Hard to do
in this era. He's Japanese. Obviously, his culture is the Japanese culture, a little bit more reserved, a little bit less boisterous than we are here in the States. So I get it from that perspective, but it leaves a lot of people hanging in the dark, and a lot of fun photoshops out there.
Yeah.
One of them is for the Dodgers, and the reason the Dodgers
they've always been,
they spend money. They've got a top payroll in the league. Dodgers reliever Joe Kelly, who currently wears number 12, said he would be honored to trade his number with Ohtani should Ohtani land there. So
wasn't Dave Roberts quoted as saying as the top priority of the offseason is Ohtani, which is tampering by itself. I mean, I guess he's a free agent, but
Dave Roberts also said they met with him. Ooh, so they
right. So it's hush hush, and maybe you know what, George, we've seen this before. Maybe that actually pisses off the Ohtani camp, because they want a hush-hush free agency, and the Dodgers are also talking about who's meeting with people.
They're not coming to you anymore. Yeah, and that's
they
it.
might not like that. So, like, do you want to stay living in Los Angeles and play for the historic Dodgers, who actually the fan base and the city cares about, and money is actually there?
They would be a mega
but they're not hush-hush. They're not hush-hush. So, yeah.
Of course, anywhere on the Pacific Coast, not only with that's a closer proximity to Japan than, let's say, like, New York or Boston, but you've got a large contingent of Japanese fans and Asian fans in those cities along the coast, whether it be Seattle, but Seattle's not in the place to spend. The Dodgers,
they're giving up money. Yeah. I mean, they have more now because they're just throwing off payroll, but that's why Ichiro actually liked it there. That from up down is easiest to travel back. Yeah. And then you do get a lot of fans there. So that's why the Seattle has previously been kind of a hotbed for Japanese players. I mean, that actually has been, by the way, rumor as they're the secret team. I don't buy it because they're getting rid of a lot of players. But as much as fans are mad about the salary dumps while they've been a contender, if they turn around and dump salary and get Ohtani, that would actually make some sense of what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So we'll see. We're talking on December 7th. They might be clearing space for Ohtani. I highly doubt it, but who knows?
So to that point, if we put the Dodgers as the front runner, and he's likely to command, when we just talked about Soto, Bryce Harper, Mike Trout all signed $400 million contracts. Yeah. Ohtani, we're going to push it into the fives, if not higher than the fives, give or take how bad the bidding war gets. $500 million.
I mean, yes, but he's already said he will not pitch all next season. So I have argued that he's potentially the GOAT because of what he does as a pitcher and a hitter, and should clip off MVPs because he's doing both of them, and we haven't seen that since Babe Ruth. If he is just a hitter,
would you tie payroll contingent to if he's got to do both?
Here's what I would do. I would talk to his people and say, look, I know what Trout is getting. I know what Harper's getting, etc. They deserve it. You would too. And maybe I could argue more because of what you would do globally and what you've been doing the last 2 years. We have not seen since Babe Ruth. Trout's better historically, but George, we could say that we've seen the 5-tool guy that is the individual greatest player, no matter what else is flashier, by 4. We could say that we've seen Mike Trout's career with Ken Griffey Jr. It was like the same career to this point. We could say with Bryce Harper, maybe his personality is more than others, but we could say we've seen him before. We've seen that before. We have not seen Ohtani before since Babe Ruth, and he's already doing it for more games, for a longer period of time, etc. Because when that trade happened, Yankees, Red Sox, obviously the historic trade, the Yankees did it with the contingent that you're done as a pitcher, you're just going to be a hitter. That is not the contingent of these teams now, but because of the recent injury, the Ohtani camp, despite being hush-hush, they had put it out there that they themselves do not want to pitch next year. They want him to rehab and just be a hitter. So what I would say to him and his people is, you deserve just as much, if not more, than Trout or Harper or anybody else in the history of the game, and we will market you as maybe the GOAT, if you are a hitter and a pitcher, and not just for this year, but into the future, because we're looking at a 10-year contract. And if you don't want to do it next year in 2024, that's fine. We want you for the future. But as long as you're going to pitch someday, and we're going to get the World Baseball Classic pitcher, and the pitcher with a below 3 ERA, who also was pitching in all-star games, and we can get that even marketing-wise, more than just on the field, then okay. We'll pay you $500 million. But George, if you're Ohtani and you're telling me, and you're his camp, you're just a hitter forever, then no. You're less than Trout and Harper. That, as a hitter, is not... He's an all-star caliber. I don't want disrespect. He is an all-star caliber player as a hitter. He is not the greatest player to ever live. If he is a hitter and a pitcher with his hitting numbers and his pitching numbers combined, people can argue he's one of the greatest players to ever live, and he's the guy since Babe Ruth who's doing this. If he's just a hitter, would you pay him $400 million, $500 million, just a hitter in perpetuity? That's harder. That is not the same as when he can pitch and hit too.
Doesn't play
in the American League.
Doesn't play the field.
Either way, if he's not going to pitch, he's not the GOAT. He's not Mike Trout in the field.
I would say you would knock the value down below 500. Because Trout was 430. I can't remember.
Yeah, and it's also years ago, so the value goes up, right?
Yeah, the value goes up. So I'd peg him like in the 490 million.
But he's not Mike Trout in the field, though. This isn't Griffey in the field. Like, he's a good enough fielder. But
I get that. But he doesn't. He designated hits and pitches. So.
Right, that's what I mean. He's going to basically just be a DH. He could have a glove in the field, but he doesn't really want to.
But I think he's still worth the, nearly $500 million just as a hitter.
But you would not be willing to set a record that will never be broken for years unless he agrees to pitch. Because
I think
he's going to get a record now. But what I'm saying is, if he hits a record right now of $490 million or 485, or even if he hits to 500 exactly, you and I both know that's going to be broken next year and the year after that. Like that, someone's going to break that record. If somebody, I'll say this, George, if he didn't have his injury, wouldn't be shocked if someone hit 600 million.
Okay.
I mean, I think that injury is part of this. Like when A-Rod broke the bank with the Rangers, the previous record was 170 something, and they said 250. We'll break the bank and kill the record. That could happen with Ohtani. The Mariners could say, we've cleared our entire payroll. We'll pay you the whole payroll because of what Ichiro did for us from a marketing standpoint, regardless of winning. And we did win a little bit with him early on. Like that could happen to a team. Ohtani's not this history buff that has to go to the Dodgers. Clearly, the guy wants tons of money and be in a good geographic area. So if that's the case, I could see a franchise saying 550, 600, we'll just pay you the money. Not if he can't pitch. I'm not doing that. I got to have a commitment, maybe even in a contract, that you're going to try. I
think he is going to try. I think all indications are that he wants to try. It sounds like that baseball personnel, front office personnel in different places, like are trying to like throw water on him and be like, okay, it's cool. We saw that you did it. Now just be a hitter. I think that's what.
But not if I'm. If I'm paying him $500 million, he's not. He's not Mike Trout unless he can pitch.
Yeah, he needs to do both. Yeah.
I mean, I'll pull up his hitting numbers right now. This is, again, it is not like he is bad. But,
no, 100, yeah.
But I mean, if we got the hitting numbers here, so Ohtani, Okay, here's Baseball Reference. Obviously, everyone trusts Baseball Reference. They've been doing it forever. This is just pure numbers here. If I get you this is taking a while to refresh.
Mm-hmm.
So him as a standard batting 2023, Shohei Ohtani, this is great still. 44 home runs, 95 RBI, a batting average of 304, an on base, an OBP of 412, a slugging percentage of 654. And obviously, he was the MVP, but he did it as more than just a hitter. He also was a pitcher. And if you go into the pitching numbers as well, to add on to that, 2023, he was 10-5 with an ERA of 3.14 and looking for his strikeout. Yeah, so his strikeout to walk ratio of 3 something as well. His overall strikeouts are, I don't know why I can't see that on here, but okay, there you go, at 167. So 167 strikeouts when you talk about what he did as a hitter, obviously deserving as an MVP, obviously deserving of $500 million. He was a stud pitcher, and if he pitched more games, he got hurt, by the way, he probably would have then won more games. And to be fair to the wins-loss record, George, as I always say, the team wasn't good. He went 10-5 on a bad team and struck out almost 200 batters, plus all the hitting. He was an MVP on a bad team because he had to be. And if you go into the year before even for him, so it's not just one season, his standard batting goes to 34 homers, 95 RBI as well, a 273 batting average, and an OBP of 356. So my point is, he is a stud as a hitter. He is an all-star caliber player as a hitter. He could vie for an MVP once every few years. As a pitcher, he's a slam dunk candidate, whether the team's good or bad. He's one of the greatest players of all time. He's Babe Ruth of this generation. If he is just a hitter, whether it be the teams want him to do it, or he wants to do it, or whether it be just 1 year or 2 years, whatever, because we're not covering Ohtani. We don't have inside info here. So whichever side is correct on what we're saying, if it's not pitching too, I'm concerned about the paying. That's all I'm saying. That's my opinion. That if I was in the front office, I would say, I want you. I'll pay record-setting deal. I want to get the global marketing that you'll provide. You're still a great hitter. I want you on board. I'm not doing 550, these kind of numbers, unless you're going to pitch, a little bit here. I got to have like 5 starts a year. I would be borderline wanting to put in a contract, but that probably would make me lose him as a player. But if I get in a situation where, say, the Dodgers bring him in and he just hits, George, he had 304 this past year. The year before that, he had 273. What if Ohtani next year and does not pitch, hits 34 home runs, hits 273, and has an OBP of 354? That's the exact spread from 2022. For you as the owner of the Dodgers, is that a return in your investment?
Just for the level of attention and the circus that kind of surrounds him, I think it is.
But is that not a thought? Then you're not getting enough hitting then.
Yeah.
For that much money. That's the thing.
I think he's going to do. I think he's going to do both. He has, explicitly, been adamant that he intends to continue to do both. I haven't.
That injury just such a bad time. That's so bad time. He could have got $700 million if he wouldn't have got hurt.
It's even crazier. Obviously, there are two different muscle do different things. That he was injured from pitching, and yet still able to hit like that. That's and he won runaway
He's
winner.
A freak.
Defending American League American League MVP as well. Obviously, with the crazy season he
had.
And
he deserved it.
Think about that. So, he is worth. It may get out of control. We'll see if it does get out of control. It's because of teams like the Dodgers and the Yankees.
I brought up the Mariners as just a team that's out of control that I don't think will do this, but just because of their clearing and the fact they've had Japanese players like Ichiro before. Is there another team, because this is hush-hush free agency as we close the show, is there a team that you throw out there? Is that a surprise, though, if the Cubs would pay a lot of money?
Yeah, it's again, we got to go to who are the biggest payrolls in the game? You saw, I would say you can't ever rule out New York, I guess, but you would say no just because you've already got what you just did with Juan Soto there, and the Yankees. What
if it's the other New York team with a lot of money? What if the Mets do it? They'd probably mess him up and he would suck. That would not work out.
Exactly. That is a possibility because
they could throw the money because they want to get the front page of the New York Times.
But you look that they threw all the money last year at all these people.
I know, but they could do it again because they want to get on the front page of the New York Times.
Sure.
I'm just saying, is that not another team?
Yeah, just solely, even though it's not probably a good fit, just solely as spenders, the Mets would be in contention.
Yeah.
Atlanta, no, it seems like they've got such a good young core with what they're doing.
Would the Astros try to reboot the dynasty?
Yeah, so throw in Houston. Would Houston spend the money?
That I feel like would be that would be like a Kevin Durant to the Warriors thing.
I'm about to say I could see him. I see him fitting in Houston more than Atlanta or the Mets.
And you feel like if he goes to Houston, they might become one of the greatest dynasties in sports.
Like, that would be just incredibly ridiculous. How are you going to boo him at that point? How are you going to boo the Astros at that point?
That would be maybe they would do that on purpose for that.
And then who else has? I'll throw the Giants in.
Giants could be another one. Yeah, they're on the Bay. They're right on that same situation. They are always in rumors for free agents. Now, granted, they don't always get that many of them.
They don't.
They're always in rumors.
They don't.
They do a lot of trades is more of what they do. I could maybe see that. I don't know. I mean, Arizona is obviously another team in that area, but they're not going to spend that kind of money.
Yeah.
And Kendricks is more interested in throwing money into WVU's NIL fund than he is probably paying. They
just
got it a pennant. They feel like they probably can run off that for 2 or 3 years.
And Texas just won the World Series. You could argue maybe if they lost, do they want to make a big splash and let Bruce Bochy on his way out to the Hall of Fame eventually? So,
or do you see an example of a team, which this would suck too, where you could have a team do it, throw money, we would know it's a bad mistake. And then 2 years later, like if the Mets did it, they would need to try to get out of this money because they wouldn't win. So it could be the Mets or even like the Marlins. They never spend, but Jim Leyland got in the Hall of Fame. His world championship is the 1 year they did spend tons of money.
Yeah.
And they won a World Series and they disbanded the team. He only was there for 2 years. Could they do something where they're like, okay, we'll throw all this money, we'll try it for a year or two, it's a 10-year contract, and then 2 years from now they got to get out of it and trade him somewhere. I could see craziness like that occur.
Yeah,
because this camp, if they're wowed by money, they may take that.
In terms of the crazy teams, Marlins popped into my head because it would be an incentive for people to actually go to those games down there. It's one of the worst attended.
And all they would do is they would just fire sale in 2 years if it didn't work. They're lords of fire sale. They 100% would do that. The only teams, though, that I think he would literally play for the next 10 years and would stay there would be the Dodgers, Yankees, and maybe another one that could be in there, George. You mentioned the Yankees with Soto, so they're kind of out of the race. What if Boston gets involved?
I would say you would think that, but like
if he wants to play in New York, why would he want to play in Boston?
Boston's recent moves have been seemingly, and you got a history with Hideo Nomo pitched in Boston.
Why not the White Sox if the Cubs? They're obviously have money too.
God, the White Sox are literally out of money. It seems.
I guess, but in the past, I guess
you got what's his face, Jerry Reinsdorf, rumor and meeting with people in Nashville to move the team. They're trading people left and right.
Yeah, I know about the Nashville rumors. That's true, but that's another Marlins type of thing that they could throw all the money that they have trying to stabilize.
There's no way in hell the White Sox would do it. Boston's more likely to do it, but the thing with Boston is just their moves in the last 2 years from trading Mookie Betts and everything. It seems like they want to get leaner, be a still good baseball. Obviously, they finished 5th in the division, but they want to get leaner and better on the financial side of the books and not be this just wildly spending team like they were in the past decade. So,
and then there's no chance at all because this could happen. And you look at money, this could even happen based on money. There's no chance at all he goes back to Anaheim. Because everyone thought Mike Trout was gone, and they end up giving him the most money, and he stayed. Everyone thought Trout was gone.
It was nice. They did a good job there. He probably loves it there. I mean,
what if they offer him the most money again? They did it with Trout. This is what happened with Trout. Everyone thought Trout was gone. Did you not think Trout was gone?
I would go 5%. There's no way.
So it's not zero then.
It's not zero. It's not zero, obviously. But man. It just seems, and it's not even like burned bridge or anything like that, Mike. It just seems like that the road has run its course and we're now at the end of the road. Hey, we didn't trade you. We respected you there. Trade you to friggin' Milwaukee or some random ass team and then, kind of F him up, So you didn't do anything like that. And the contract has run its course. And hey, if you'd like to come back, we know you didn't hate it here. And this is where you got your start in Major League Baseball. So, but it just seems very slim at this point.
It does. And you know what should happen next? It's not going to happen, but you know what should happen next? It should already happened. Mike Trout should request a trade.
Philadelphia.
I don't care where it is. It doesn't have to be Philadelphia. Get out of there. I don't care where. It doesn't have to be Philadelphia. I know he's from there. He's an Eagles fan. It doesn't have to be Philadelphia. They should have went there in the first place.
It has to be Philadelphia.
He should have went to Philadelphia in the first place because they were trying to get him and they had some money then, and obviously they won a pennant since then. And who knows about Harper, whether he would have been there and they could have been together. And that would be kind of annoying. But you got to get out of Anaheim, man. You got to get out of Los Angeles. It's not even really Los Angeles. It's freaking Anaheim. It's a suburb. You got to get out of there, man. He's one of the greatest players of all time, if not the greatest. 5-tool player. He's not marketed well, obviously. He's not a big personality. But if you look at the numbers, he was great before Harper was great. He was great all the way through. He's one of the greatest players ever. I could argue is the greatest player ever. And yet, that's not going to get enough discussion unless he can at least play in the playoffs again. The one postseason series with the Angels, that's not going to cut it years ago. No one remembers it anymore. He took the money, which I don't hate anyone for taking the money, but you cannot play your whole career there, man. It's a Hannah Monet in a basement. That's basically what's going on. So if Ohtani's gone, you got to get out of there too. And they probably would do it to get out of the money and then just fully rebuild. Granted, the trade would be really hard, but George, nobody thought the Rangers could trade A-Rod because of the money. It'll happen. If he wants out of there, we always figure out how these things can happen. So it's not his personality, but he got to request a trade. But yeah, where Ohtani goes will be interesting. It remains hush-hush though. So We'll see how long this hush-hush hot stove goes. It's very counterproductive for the hot stove conversation.
One quick hit as we wrap up here on this edition of the HBS. NBA wraps up its in-season tournament. A little bit of a contrived idea and sounded crazy when the season started, but I think people have come around to it, and the level of play certainly is merited. It's been really fascinating. I've watched a lot of the games.
LeBron gives a damn. He's not missing these games.
LeBron is not. I joked with a friend of the program, Ryan, that I said LeBron is offering, telling these guys that he's going to pay them double what they would win in the in-season tournament.
He wants to win this. You know why he wants? He wants to put on his resume that he won this freaking thing.
I want to say I won the in-season tournament. So
he was big on the in-season tournament. Yeah,
another $600,000.
Jordan never won the NCAA tournament. That didn't exist, obviously, back then. Yeah, he wants to do it. So the players care. I do think it's a little bit of a stupid thing, but the players care, and it's happened in soccer. It's not going away.
Lakers Pelicans on the one side, which is kind of cool because we get LeBron Zion, which isn't a matchup we've seen.
Yeah, Anthony Davis, former team,
and Anthony Davis's former team, CJ McCollum, because Zion's been injured and fat and whatever else over there. And then a cool matchup on the other side in the East with the Bucks, who we know are the Bucks, with Dame and Giannis, and one of the young and up and coming teams in the league, Tyrese Halliburton and the Indiana Pacers. So a winner out of there. I'll take Bucks Lakers, and I'll take Milwaukee to win it, which is a little bit, we didn't get some of the randomness of maybe like a unheralded team winning something like the Knicks.
George, I wouldn't be against that happening. It would be kind of cool for Damian Lillard and Giannis to kind of start off this run winning something of note.
I just think when you put them head to head, that Milwaukee is better than Los Angeles. But as you said, LeBron is playing to win, so it's different.
But here's my thing: I would probably bet in favor of Milwaukee. Here's my issue. I'm not going to root for that. I don't want to have that on social media or to even do that to LeBron's legacy. George, as much as LeBron is the beast that has carried teams that aren't nearly good enough to finals, and that's a feather in his cap for me, his finals win-loss record has always brought up the fact that it's under 500, and that's a negative for him. If he goes to the freaking in-season tournament and loses there to a team that has 2 stars while he has 2 stars, that's going to be used as a freaking negative against him, whether it's fair or not. So I don't even want to have that experience. I feel like he's better to not be there if he's not going to win it. But yes, I could easily see Milwaukee getting it done. And it is kind of interesting because you would figure, George, that a team like Giannis and Dame that are all about winning a championship, or even LeBron and AD, it's all about winning a championship, and LeBron is very old, that they wouldn't care as much to play 40 minutes a night for this in-season thing. They would want to preserve their bodies for the spring and for the summer. They want to win this. They do want to win this. So I'm surprised by how much the players want to win this damn thing. I thought it would be a little bit of a farce. Like, they want to win this more than soccer teams want to win their in-season half the time. So, yeah, we'll see them.
This has been another edition of the Howitzer and Buzzsaw Show. We remind you, puts a nice bow on it for us. We remind you that you can find the HBS wherever you get your podcasts. That includes on Apple Podcasts, Google, TuneIn, Spotify, and more. Just search Howitzer Buzzsaw, wherever you get your pods. Also find us as part of the Hyphen Podcast Group, delivering great podcasts to the people, a Morgantown, West Virginia-based podcast collective, hyphenpodcastgroup.com, online and on socials.
Again, you can find us on social at Howitzer Buzzsaw for the show, at Gerbo3, at Mike Osti 11. You can find us everywhere you get your podcasts. And yes, if you can't find us, you're not trying hard enough. And you can also find us enjoying the chaos. At least me.
I enjoy some of the chaos.
Yeah, I'm enjoying the chaos. Yeah.
This has been another edition of the Howitzer and Buzzsaw Show, where we conquer brackets, bust payrolls, and conquer sports radio.
One day at a time. All right.